Today I'm going to speak a little bit about expectations. When we think about expectations, in general, we can see that they can become the basis for disappointment. That is, without expectations, we really wouldn't have disappointment. And specifically, without unrealistic expectations, we wouldn't have disappointment. There are both realistic and unrealistic expectations, such as when I flip the light switch on, I can kind of realistically expect the light to come on. It might not, but it's a realistic expectation. It might not because the bulb has a limited, has a lifespan. It's impermanent, and it might not work. And someday it won't. You'll flip the switch and you'll have to change the bulb. And to think otherwise is a false expectation. And so some expectations can be unrealistic and not very helpful for us. And we have expectations, so it's good to be aware of them. But light bulbs is not really the context of what I want to talk about expectations in. I want to talk about expectations in regarding two things. And the first is our own practice. Many people, myself included, most of us, when we encountered the Buddha's teachings, put them into practice, and we see favorable results in our lives, in our own minds. And for me, this has been a strong force of conviction in the teachings, like an experiential, a faith based on experience. And I see the results of applying antidotes compared to the results of letting myself be dragged along by the afflictions. And when I see the positive effects that generating love and compassion have on my own mind, that also helps me to have a strong faith in the teachings, to a strong faith that these teachings are reliable, and that if I practice them, I can expect to get the results that I want, that the teachings say they lead to. And so, along with this and examining and contemplating the reasoning behind the philosophy has led me to have a strong conviction in the fruits of the path. Faith that enlightenment is indeed possible, and that if we practice what the Buddha said to practice and avoid what he said to avoid, or abandon what he said to abandon, then we can become fully awakened also. But with regards to the timeline of our spiritual progress, we can very easily develop unrealistic expectations. And that can lead to problems in the way of discouragement and despondency. So everyone in this room has heard that enlightenment can take countless great eons. So probably nobody's expecting to become enlightened next week, unless they've been working on it for a long time. What I'm talking about here is more on a level of expecting that successfully applying antidotes to the afflictions several dozen times is going to mean that the afflictions no longer arise. Or expecting that because we've been greatly moved, deeply moved by meditations on love and compassion and bodhicitta, and because we care about others deeply, that the self-centered thought is thoroughly subdued. These are unrealistic expectations. Having been habituated to afflictions and a self-centered view since beginningless time, it's unrealistic to expect that it can be reversed without very prolonged, sustained habituation to the antidotes. And it takes repeatedly applying the teachings to our life, day to day, moment to moment, to be able to subdue the afflictions and our self-centered way of thinking. And this is greatly needed and very beneficial, but it does not cut the root, these problems at their root. They will continue to arise. Afflictions will continue to arise in our minds, and we will continue to have to apply antidotes that steer our mind back to virtue over and over and over again. And each time we recognize an affliction, each time we apply an antidote, we strengthen a virtuous habit. And if we have expectations that we should be free of all afflictions by now, we will be disappointed in our progress. And that can lead to despondency, which is not helpful for our practice. But instead, recognize the importance of what we are doing, the importance of recognizing and countering the afflictions, the importance of all the effort we put into creating virtue. We can rejoice in our practice. We rejoice that we are aware of the afflictions and that we are courageously countering them. And this joyous mind is very conducive to making more progress. We speak of joyous effort, often joy and effort go together. And so if we take joy in our practice, that will help sustain our practice. We will be encouraging ourselves. Even with great effort and diligence, there's only one antidote that will actually destroy the afflictions, the wisdom directly realizing emptiness. And even when one has such realization, it still takes a long time and repeated meditation to eradicate all the afflictions and their stains, level by level. So a bodhisattva, on entering the first ground, has just attained a realization of emptiness. They've just entered the path of seeing and the first ground. And according to the Sutrayana view, they still have a couple of eons left to go before they attain Buddhahood. Are they discouraged about this? No. The first ground is named perfect joy. They're striving for Buddhahood in order to attain the qualities necessary to guide all beings from suffering. And they've just reached a huge milestone and are very, very joyful. They can realistically expect that their practice will lead them to their goal. And this is not a false expectation, and they know it. Similarly, with our practice, if we create the proper causes and conditions through diligently and wholeheartedly practicing what the Buddha taught, we too can realistically expect to attain Buddhahood. We need to maintain a balance that neither falls to unrealistic expectations nor into complacency. I need to be content with creating the causes, and I need to diligently and continuously be creating them. And we need to always be watching our minds, like a mother watches her young child. A responsible mother doesn't let her toddler run off into the road or hang out at the edge of a cliff, And mindful of our precepts and values, we need to be continuously guarding our minds and not let them stray into trouble. If we are doing this moment by moment, we are practicing the Dharma. The other thing I wanted to talk about is having expectations of others. And it can be easy to criticize other practitioners, being critical of how they should behave, especially if they're monastics. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be aware of what is proper conduct for a monastic or for a Buddhist in general. For the bhikshus, and I believe the bhikshunis have this precept also, there's a precept to accept advice. And it also instructs us to give advice. Here's a little excerpt from that. It says, Venerable, accept advice. Venerable, you should advise other bhikshus according to the Dharma. So should other bhikshus advise you according to the Dharma. Thus, the disciples of the Buddha will benefit by advising, teaching, confessing, and repenting to one another. And there's also a precept not to complain, pick faults, or abuse others. So we need to have some wisdom and some skill about what is proper to mention to someone and what is not. And we need to mostly look at our own motivation. Are we being critical because we are afflicted? Are we being critical out of partiality, anger, fear, and ignorance? We're just annoyed at something, we don't like what somebody's doing, or are they doing something that's wrong? Is it something that's important that we need to mention, or is it something that we can let go of? If we are criticizing because we're afflicted, then we're not really qualified to give advice, and we should just curb our critical mind rather than speak. I should be more concerned with correcting my own faults than with pointing out the faults of others. And when we speak of the Sangha, and we use the term Sangha, often we are referring to the assembly of fully ordained monastics. But when we speak of the Sangha jewel, that is not what we're talking about. We are not taking refuge in ordinary beings. The Sangha jewel refers to any Arya being, ordained or lay. We are often taught to look at our teachers as Buddhas, and this is in the context of maintaining great respect for the teachings and the training instructions we receive from them. This does not mean they actually are Buddhas or even Arya beings. They may be ordinary beings. I'm not qualified to be able to tell that, to know that. But all ordinary beings like us are subject to afflictions and are sometimes overwhelmed by them. They're suitable objects for compassion. And this is an important point. Whether someone is a senior monastic, a junior monastic, or a layperson, we need to have compassion for them when they are afflicted, rather than be angry at them because they didn't live up to our expectations. On a day-to-day basis, we need to be mindful of how we think about other practitioners. We are around other monastics, and so we need to be mindful that we don't fall into the fault of criticizing nuns and monks. We shouldn't expect that just because someone is senior and has studied and practiced for a long time, that they have eradicated afflictions. Instead, it is helpful to be more concerned with our own behavior and not too disturbed by the behavior of others. We are all doing our best, and the practice is leading us in the right direction. I've been facilitating a safe course on refuge, and one of the questions a few weeks ago was something along the lines of, how does refuge help at the time of death? And some thoughts that came up regarding that for me were that when we go to the Buddha for refuge, we take refuge by putting his teachings into practice. Through our daily practice of recognizing and encountering afflictions, and by putting effort into developing virtuous states of mind such as compassion, fortitude, wisdom, and so on. And this develops the habit of a calm, peaceful, and virtuous mind that will serve us well at the time of death. So let us all rejoice in our practice and try to meet every situation with a calm, peaceful mind, meet other people with compassion and kindness, without expecting too much too fast from ourselves or from others.